Hi, it's Donovan. I'm going to start doing a bit of reading now and then. Probably more often now than then. More often than not. What this series is it is to introduce to liberals triggering ideas. Because here's the deal for those of you who are on the left. You don't understand the right at all. You just have a cloud of ideas that you pick out what you like. Well, that cloud looks like a Nazi today. That cloud looks like a misogynist today. That cloud looks like, say, an anti-black racist, but not necessarily like a Nazi racist. Or that cloud looks like white privilege today. All these various things that really have more to do with your general ignorance of how to truly research an issue. This is really what it all comes down to. You were lied to. You are a little clever with language, and it is because language is so poorly used. So it's sort of as if you find art and people call you an artist. None of it was ever yours. You're not very talented. It's just that the bar is very low. Most of the time, people on the left are not, say, math smart. Generally. You're also, oddly enough, there is the frequency of low muscle mass, which indicates sort of that you're not in the trades or some form of work that you stand a lot. Now, there's going to be a lot of people who are like, I go to school and I'm becoming a social studies or social work major, blah, 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 and I walk at my job. And you're one of the rare motherfuckers who's that's the truth. You know, it's just that's how that is. Otherwise, Americans wouldn't be so goddamn fat, and especially women. They have jobs that they sit down at. That's it. It doesn't work another way. There's a lot of people like to argue that there's all sorts of genes or something, and it's like, yeah, but I mean, we're talking about people who look like fucking furniture. You know, at their sheer height and the muscle mass they can have, this is a person who actually should have been training almost like an athlete in their adult years because they're too damn big. They're a big human, so you need to actually do things to deal with the fact that your body will simply put on adipose tissue. And we haven't done this. We haven't dealt with the fact that Americans are gigantic, that there's almost never been a land where as many people are as tall and large as we are, because we have more than enough nutrients and more than enough calories. This idea that Americans are starving is fucking bullshit. Knowledge and Notions, from Thomas Sowell's Intellectuals and Society. Quote, from an early age, smart people are reminded of their intelligence, separated from their peers in gifted classes and presented with opportunities unavailable to others. For these and other reasons, intellectuals tend to have an inflated sense of their own wisdom. Unquote. By Daniel J. Flynn. Keep in mind, I had to reprogram myself. I was on the left. I did not understand the right. I figured it had to be an information set that they had access to that I simply never, ever, ever stumbled on. It's not. It's an entire way of understanding reality. The left does not. The left wraps reality around their idealism. The right deals with reality. They just deal with it. No ideals are there. The only ideals that are there are traditional religion. Like everyone else, intellectuals have a mixture of knowledge and notions. For some intellectuals in some fields, that knowledge includes knowledge of the systematic procedures available to test notions and determine their validity as knowledge. Since ideas are their life's work, intellectuals might be expected to more thoroughly or more systematically subject notions to such tests. Whether or to what extent they do so in practice is, of course, itself a notion that needs to be tested. There are, after all, other skills in which intellectuals also tend to excel, including verbal skills that can be used to evade the testing of their favorite notions. This is particularly true of Tom Hartman and Sam Cedar. In short, the various skills of intellectuals can be used either to foster intellectual standards or to circumvent those standards and promote non-intellectual or even anti-intellectual agendas. In other words, intellectuals, defined as an occupational category, may or may not exemplify the intellectual process. Indeed, it is possible for people not defined as intellectuals, engineers, financiers, physicians, to adhere to intellectual procedures more often, more rigorously than some or most intellectuals. This definitely applies to Tom Hartman and Sam Cedar. Fucking cunts. The extent to which this is true is another empirical question. What is important here is that the mere word intellectual, applied to an occupational category, not be allowed to insinuate the presence of intellectual principles or standards which may or may not, in fact, be present. However, important rigorous intellectual principles may be within particular fields in which some intellectuals specialize when people operate as public intellectuals, espousing ideas and policies to a wider population beyond their professional colleagues. They may or may not carry over intellectual rigor into these more general or more policy-oriented or more ideologically charged discussions. Say a very good example of this is the Young Turks do not adhere to a rigorous standard, while somebody, say, like Stefan Molyneux, does adhere to a rather rigorous standard of trying to prove his point. Bertrand Russell, for example, was both a public intellectual and a leading authority within a rigorous field, but the Bertrand Russell who is relevant here is not the author of landmark treatises on mathematics, but the Bertrand Russell who advocated unilateral disarmament for Britain in the 1930s while Hitler was rearming Germany. Russell's advocacy of disarmament extended all the way to disbanding the army and navy and air force, unquote, again with Hitler rearming not far away. The Noam Chomsky who is relevant here is not the linguistics scholar, but the Noam Chomsky of similarly extravagant political pronouncements. The Edmund Wilson who is relevant is not the highly regarded literary critic, but the Edwin Wilson who urged Americans to vote for the communists in the 1932 elections. In this, he was joined by such other intellectual luminaries of the time as John Dos Passos, Sherwood Anderson, Langston Hughes, Lincoln Steffens, and many other well-known writers of that era. Visiting the United States in 1933, George Bernard Shaw said, "You Americans are so fearful of dictators. Dictatorship is the only way in which government can accomplish anything. See what a mess democracy has led to. What are you afraid? Why are you afraid of dictatorship?" Now, for some of you who are young progressives and liberals, you need to look up George Bernard Shaw. I'll let you get to that in another tab. He created one of the most important socialist political organizations in the first world, the Fabian Society. He and I believe the other guy's Wells, I want to say, but I don't think that's not right. And Bernard Shaw, what you need to do is you need to YouTube George Bernard Shaw, and then you need to put in the word Mussolini after. Because you see, George Bernard Shaw and other writers of his time, all these people who, many people of my era of time, so this would have been, I graduated in 1993 from high school. I was required to read people like him. This guy is considered super awesome liberal pants. And he's one of the arguments for socialism. Smart guys like him who wrote My Fair Lady. You just remember, a lot of you people on the left, you're fucking Hitler's barber, or especially a lot of you Antifa people thinking you should beat up white folks who go to Trump rallies. A lot of you motherfuckers are Hitler's fucking pedicurists, dickheads. Leaving London for a vacation in South Africa in 1935, Shaw declared, "It is nice to go for a holiday and know that Hitler has settled everything so well in Europe." While Hitler's anti-Jewish actions eventually alienated Shaw, the famous playwright remained partial to the Soviet dictatorship. In 1939, after the Nazi-Soviet pact, Shaw said, "Herr Hitler's under the powerful thumb of Stalin, whose interest in peace is overwhelming, and everyone except myself is frightened out of his or her wits." A week later, the Second World War began, with Hitler invading Poland from the west, followed by Stalin invading from the east. The list of top-ranked intellectuals who made utterly irresponsible statements and who advocated hopelessly unrealistic and recklessly dangerous things could be extended almost indefinitely. Many public intellectuals have been justly renowned within their respective fields, but the point here is that many did not stay within their respective fields. As George J. Stigler said of some of his fellow Nobel laureates, they issue stern ultimata to the public on almost a monthly basis, and sometimes on no other basis. The fatal misstep of such intellectuals is assuming their superior ability within a particular realm can be generalized as superior wisdom or morality overall. Chess grandmasters, musical prodigies, and others who are as remarkable within their respective specialties as intellectuals are within theirs seldom make that mistake. This is starting to come up with a lot of Hollywood types and singers. These people think that they have something to fucking tell people about policy and about history and about society. Fucking Capper chick or whatever. That goddamn idiot. Literally biting the hand that fed him. Literally. Pissing on his own family. The real family that fucking raised him. Asshole. Here it is sufficient to make a sharp distinction between the intellectual occupation and intellectual standards which members of that occupation can and do violate, especially in their roles as public intellectuals making pronouncements about society and advocating government policies. What was said of John Maynard Keynes by his biographer and fellow economist Roy Harrod could be said of many other intellectuals. He held forth on a great range of topics, on some of which he was thoroughly expert, but on others of which he may have derived his views from the few pages of a book at which he happened to glance. The air of authority was the same in both cases. Knowledge and Notions, Chapter 2, Intellectuals in Society by Thomas Sowell. Liberals, progressives, leftists, violent people who like storming political rallies. The right understands you completely and totally, all the way, like down to things about yourself that you don't want to talk about. And you don't have to because you're not religious most of the time. And so you have no confessional. In every major religion, there's some form of confession. Except I don't think in Islam, but that's because Islam is evil. Yeah. So there you go. See, the right knows you. You don't understand the right. So you should read things like Intellectuals in Society and embrace your superiors. It's better that way. You should embrace them. You should understand that you're broken. You do need help. They want to help you, and they don't want to hurt you. They really actually do not want to hurt you. That would require them giving you a lot of attention, and that's what you want because you're broken and you need lots of attention. And yeah, so if you have something really stupid to say, leave it in the comments. I will ignore it. And yeah, I will be reading more of Intellectuals in Society and things like Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, I want to just make sure I put that out there in case Colin does not want a section of his book read. I actually am going to get in touch with them and see. But then other things I think are good for people to just hear. Propaganda. That's a book that in particular I think is very important for people to hear parts of. Yeah, there's a few ones that are really good. So later on,